The leaves hit the sidewalk before the man even stopped walking. Cold. October. The kind of morning that made you want to get wherever you were going fast and not look at anything in between. Selim Virek did not stop for things. He stopped for nothing. His shoes alone cost more than 3 months of rent in this zip code. The black town car idling at the curb. 2 security behind him, quiet like dogs trained not to bark. He was cutting through this block because his driver had flagged a gridlock 2 streets over. That was the only reason he was here. That was the only reason any of this happened. The church steps were loaded with people. A chalkboard sign at the edge of the sidewalk read "Free Meal" with a small heart drawn under it. Volunteers in matching blue shirts moved back and forth handing out brown paper bags. The crowd pressing in for them was the kind of crowd nobody photographed. Omegas mostly. A few betas who'd run out of options. Eyes down. Shoulders curved. Everyone pretending not to see each other. Selim moved past them without a glance. He got 4 steps. And then he heard it. "Can you carry me for a while?" He didn't stop immediately. His body kept moving for 1 more second before something in the words physically slowed him down. Like a hook catching fabric. The voice came from the bottom of the church steps. He turned. "Hi viewers, I want you to answer this. If you were Selim in that moment, would you have kept walking?" A young man. Crouched low on the stone step. Dark curls stuck to his forehead. Clothes that had seen too many nights in the wrong kind of cold. His hands were braced against the step like he was trying to push himself up and his body was refusing. His eyes. Cloudy. Still. Not tracking anything. Blind. The crowd near him had shifted away. Not dramatically. Just enough. The way people move from something that makes them uncomfortable without wanting to admit that's what they're doing. Selim's lead security stepped in close and lowered his voice. "Sir? We're already running behind." Selim didn't answer. The young man, he couldn't have been more than mid-20s, turned his face slightly in Selim's direction. Like he could feel the pause. Like he had learned to read silence the way other people read faces. "Just for a bit," he added. Quieter now. Something in that second line hit different than the first. The first one sounded like a question. The second one sounded like someone who already knew the answer was no, and asked anyway. Selim had heard that exact tone before. Not from this person. Not from anyone he could name. But somewhere, a long time ago, before the money in the company and the kind of power that made rooms go quiet when he walked in, somewhere in a version of himself he didn't discuss. He had sounded exactly like that. He took 1 step toward the young man. His security shifted. "Sir?" "Stand up," Selim said. The young man tried. His legs buckled on the first attempt. He grabbed the iron railing beside the step, missed it, and started going sideways. Selim covered the remaining distance in 2 strides and caught him by the arm before he hit the stone. He was light. Too light. Selim adjusted his grip. And then he did something that nobody, not his security team, not the volunteers, not the people waiting in that line, had ever seen a man like Selim Virek do. He bent down. And he lifted him. The crowd went absolutely silent. Not the dramatic movie kind of silence. The real kind. Where people stop mid-sentence. Where paper bags stop rustling. Where even the wind seems to understand something just shifted. One volunteer stared with her hand frozen over a bag. An older beta man near the sign actually took his hat off like he was witnessing something formal. The 2 security guards exchanged a look and then returned their faces to neutral because that was their job. Selim carried the young man up the steps and past the church doors. No announcement. No explanation. And then, just before they cleared the entrance, the young man's head turned slightly toward Selim's shoulder. His grip tightened. His voice dropped to almost nothing. They said, "You wouldn't notice." Selim's steps didn't stop. But his jaw did. Because that sentence, that specific sentence, was not a thank you. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't the rambling of someone half-conscious from hunger. It sounded like the end of a sentence that had a beginning somewhere else. Like a warning that arrived too late. The elevator doors closed and the noise of the street disappeared entirely. 63 floors. Selim stood still with the young man held against him, watching the numbers climb. His security team occupied the elevator corners without speaking. Outside these walls, 3 cities' worth of operations ran under his name. Contracts. Acquisitions. Quiet arrangements that kept certain things moving and certain people silent. He had not made an impulsive decision in 11 years. He made one today. The young man's breathing was shallow but steady. He hadn't spoken again since the church steps. His fingers were still loosely curled into the fabric of Selim's jacket, not clinging, just resting there, like even unconscious. Some part of him was being careful not to ask for too much. The penthouse doors opened. Selim carried him to the nearest couch and set him down. The room was all floor-to-ceiling glass and cold, expensive quiet. Matte surfaces. Nothing soft except the couch itself. It was not a room built for someone in this condition. Selim stood back and looked at him clearly for the first time. The clothes were wrong for the weather. The kind of thing that happened over months, not days. His wrists where they came out of his sleeves were narrow enough to be concerning. His face was angular and bruised looking under the eyes, not from a fight, but from the specific hollowness that came from a body running past empty. His name? Selim hadn't asked. He turned to Marcus, his head of security. "Get the house doctor up here. And don't make it a conversation." Marcus nodded and stepped away. Selim pulled a chair to the side of the couch and sat. Not hovering. Just close enough to watch. The young man's hands moved even in stillness. That was the first thing Selim actually clocked. His fingers twitched at certain sounds, the soft mechanical click of the elevator returning downstairs, a door closing 2 rooms over, the shift of Marcus's footsteps on the hardwood. Every sound registered in his hands before his face changed at all. His body was cataloging the room. Not sleeping. Processing. The doctor arrived in 14 minutes. Did a quiet assessment. Dehydration. Malnutrition. No acute injuries but evidence of older ones, healed wrong, a few of them. When the doctor left, the young man's eyes opened. Cloudy. Pale. Pointed at the ceiling. He didn't speak immediately. He counted. Selim noticed because he watched him do it. 4 slow breaths, each one deliberate, like a person remembering a system they practiced. Then his head turned at an angle that was 3 degrees off from where Selim actually was sitting. "You took me somewhere high," he said. Not a question. Selim didn't respond. The air pressure changed in the elevator. The young man added, like he was explaining a calculation. "We went up a long time." Still not alarmed. Not grateful. Not performing any of the things people performed when they woke up somewhere unfamiliar. Just orienting. "What's your name?" Selim said. A pause. "Soren." Single syllable. No last name offered. He said it the way people said names they'd been asked to repeat in bad situations, flat, ready. He turned his face slightly in Selim's actual direction this time. More accurate than the first attempt. You didn't have to bring me here, Soren said. I know. Another pause. Why did you? Selim thought about several answers. He chose none of them. Sleep. Soren turned his face back toward the ceiling. His fingers twitched again at a sound from the kitchen, soft, far away, nothing threatening. But his grip on the couch cushion tightened for 3 full seconds before it released. And then, across the room, a tray that had been left balanced on the edge of a cabinet shifted. Started to tip. Soren's hand shot out. Not toward it. Away from it. He pressed himself sideways on the couch, tucking his arm in, a half-second before the tray fell and clattered against the floor. Selim stared at the tray. Then back at Soren. Soren had already gone still again. Face blank. Like nothing happened. Lucky movement, Selim said slowly. Soren didn't answer. And that was the problem. He didn't say yes. He wasn't guessing. Selim kept coming back to the tray. To the specific geometry of it. Soren's body moving away from impact before the impact gave any sound. Not a flinch. Not a startle. A calculation. He didn't bring it up again that first day. Or the second. He watched instead. Soren was not easy to read. He asked for almost nothing. Ate what was placed near him without complaining and without excess. He learned the layout of the penthouse in less than 48 hours. Selim caught him navigating to the bathroom in the middle of the night without touching a single wall. Deliberate steps. Even intervals. He had counted the floor plan. On the third morning, Selim was on a call at the kitchen island when Soren came in. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen. Listened. Waited for the call to end. When it did, I didn't mean to interrupt. He hadn't interrupted. He'd calculated when he wouldn't. Selim set the phone down. You didn't. Soren moved to the counter, his fingers trailing lightly along the edge until they found the coffee setup Marcus had left out. He didn't ask where anything was. He found it. You run a logistics company, Soren said. Flat. Like he was confirming something already filed away. Selim went still. How do you know that? You were on the phone for 11 minutes. 3 of those were you telling someone a shipment was being rerouted through a different clearance channel. A short pause. That's not a small company language. That's infrastructure language. He poured his coffee. The word infrastructure hung in the air between them. Selim's company was publicly known. So the information itself wasn't the issue. The issue was the precision of how Soren had pulled it from a partial conversation. The way he categorized language by type. This was not a man who had spent his life being helpless. This was a man who had spent his life listening. Those were 2 completely different things. Selim's operations, the visible parts, ran through freight, security contracts, and private consulting. Clean on paper. But underneath that there were layers his board didn't see and his legal team didn't ask about. Certain routes. Certain contracts that moved things faster than regulation allowed. Not trafficking. He had never. He drew the line there. Clear and absolute. But the infrastructure he built. Other people had used it. He hadn't always looked hard enough at who. Soren sat down across from him with the coffee. You've been watching me, Soren said. You've been performing, Selim said back. Soren's expression didn't change. But the rhythm of his breathing did, just slightly, one longer exhale. What makes you think that? The tray. Silence. Long enough to mean something. I get sounds early sometimes, Soren said finally. It doesn't mean anything. That's not what that was. Another silence. Different texture than the first one. This one had weight. Why does it matter? Soren said. I'm not a threat to you. That's not why I'm asking. Soren turned his face toward the window. The cloudy eyes caught the light and did nothing with it. His fingers wrapped around the coffee mug. I used to not trust quiet, he said. He wasn't explaining. He was just leaving it there. Like something he'd been carrying and needed to set down somewhere that wasn't himself. Selim didn't fill the silence. And then Soren's shoulders did something that wasn't a shrug and wasn't a collapse. Something between the two. Like a wall deciding to let a door exist somewhere in it. Across the room, the door to the back office shifted, Marcus coming through. Soren's head turned toward it. Exact angle. Perfect. Not toward the sound of the door. Toward where Marcus's feet would be a half second after it opened. He was reading something Selim couldn't hear. That wasn't luck. That wasn't trauma response. That was training. Selim opened the files that evening. Not because of Soren. He told himself that. He ran internal audits routinely. This was routine. He opened the logistics branch reports, the mid-sector ones, the routes that ran through the overnight clearance channels. 3 missing shipment entries. Not missing like lost. Missing like removed. The kind of removal that took access and motive and someone who understood exactly where in the system the gap would be overlooked. He pulled the dates. Cross-referenced with flagged route reports from the previous quarter that his compliance team had passed up to him with no further action recommended. One route kept surfacing. A transport corridor that ran through 4 states under a shell vendor his company had used twice. Both times marked as secure private freight. He pulled the vendor ID. It was defunct. Dissolved. But the dissolution date was recent, 4 months ago. And the final filed routes listed under it included a classification code. Omega Transport. Selim sat with that for a long time. Not freight. Not cargo. People. The corridor had been active for 14 months before the vendor dissolved. 14 months of filings inside a system that bore his company's infrastructure. Not run by him. Not authorized by him. But made possible by the network he built. He opened a secondary window and cross-referenced the corridor against incident reports pulled from a federal compliance database his security team maintained access to. 3 reported disappearances tied to that corridor. He stared at the screen. The next morning, Selim placed a bowl of cut fruit on the kitchen counter before Soren came in. And when Soren arrived and settled into the same chair and reached for the coffee, Selim said one thing. What do you remember about how you got to the church? Soren's hand stopped. Just for a moment. Then continued to the mug. Pieces, he said. Pieces of what? Soren picked up the mug. Drank. Set it down with a controlled steadiness that was the opposite of casual. Why are you asking about that? Not defensive. Measured. I found something in my records, Selim said. A transport vendor. Specific routes. The silence that followed was not the same as any of the others. Soren's face didn't change. His hands didn't move. But the quality of his stillness shifted, went from present to somewhere behind a wall that had been built fast and built strong. What code? Soren said quietly. Selim told him the vendor classification number. Soren put the mug down. Stood up. Walked 2 steps from the table and stopped with his back to Selim, one hand pressed flat against the counter's edge. His breathing had changed. Not panicked, but forced, even the way people breathe when every instinct was telling them to run, and they were overriding it. Soren. Don't. His voice was low. Don't say it again. Selim didn't. He waited. Soren stood there for a full minute. Chest rising and falling. Hands still flat against the counter. Then he turned around. His face was calm in the way faces were calm when a person had spent a long time learning how to make it calm regardless of what was underneath. Where did you find that code? He said. Inside my own company records, Selim said. Soren said nothing. The weight of that sentence moved between them like weather. Because Soren already knew what it meant. He had always known what it meant. He was standing in the penthouse of the man whose infrastructure had made it possible. It came at night. Not a nightmare, or not only a nightmare. More like a door that had been pressed shut for a long time, deciding it couldn't hold anymore. Selim heard it from the office. A low sound. Controlled. The kind of sound someone made when they'd had a lot of practice keeping sounds small. He found Soren on the floor beside the couch. Not fallen, sitting. Back against it. Knees up. Head down. Both hands pressed over his ears in a way that looked less like blocking sound and more like trying to hold something inside his own skull from getting out. Selim sat on the floor. Not across the room. Not standing. He lowered himself down 3 feet away from Soren and said nothing. Soren didn't look up. Minutes passed. Then, lock spaces, Soren said to the floor. Small ones. Selim didn't move. They kept the lights off. Not for any reason. Just because it saved power. He exhaled through his nose sharp. That's what someone explained to us. That it saved power. The word us. That one word. Soren kept his hands over his ears. They had a system for it. For all of it. Registration. Documentation. There was someone who did the paperwork. And they were thorough. Because that's what made it look clean. He laughed once, flat, humorless. They priced us like inventory. Selim's hands were still on the floor beside him. Still. We heard everything, Soren said. That's what they didn't account for. They treated us like we couldn't process. Like if you couldn't see, you couldn't. He stopped. Pressed his hands harder. Started again. I heard names. Routes. Amounts. I heard which vendors held the contracts, and which companies the money moved through. He paused. I heard them talking about the clearance channel. A beat. Your clearance channel. Selim said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that wasn't either too small or too large. And he understood, clearly, right now, on this floor, that what Soren needed in this moment was not absolution. Was not explanation. Was not a man with a lot of power deciding how he felt about this. He just needed someone to stay. So Selim stayed. After a while, Soren's hands came down from his ears. He pressed them flat on his own knees. They thought the weak point was the omegas, Soren said. Because we were the ones moving. The ones with no record of being anywhere. He lifted his head. Not toward Selim, toward nothing, somewhere past all of this. They were wrong. His jaw tightened. One of the people at the top of that chain. A pause. Long. Pointed. He reported directly to you. The room went so quiet the glass walls might as well have disappeared. Selim did not move. He did not react. He sat there on the floor of his own penthouse with the city glittering 63 floors below, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not guilt exactly, not yet. Something earlier than guilt. The specific cold of realizing the damage had already been done, and the question now was only what you were going to do with that fact. He looked at Soren. Soren was already looking back. Straight at him. Exact angle. Not at the window. Not at the space beside him. At him. You already knew, Selim said. Soren said nothing. Because he had known from the church steps. He had known exactly whose arms he was asking to be carried in. The door to Selim's private office had been closed for 6 hours. Marcus knew better than to knock. The rest of the staff moved through the penthouse with the particular quiet of people who understood that something had shifted in the atmosphere, and that the safest thing was to not be the one who made it worse. Inside the office, Selim sat at his desk. Not working. Just sitting. The files were open on the screen in front of him. He wasn't looking at them anymore. He had already looked at everything. Twice. And the second time hadn't changed anything about what the first time had shown him. 14 months. 14 months of his infrastructure running as a cover for something he would have burned to the ground if he'd known. Pause on that. He built the system. He signed the clearance channel contracts. He approved the vendor relationships. He had never asked one specific question, not because he was careless, but because the people around him had made it very easy not to ask. That was by design. He understood that now. Power doesn't protect people. He had believed it did. He had told himself for years that the way he operated, quiet, precise, untouchable, was a form of control that kept the wrong people from getting too close to anything that mattered. What it actually did was give the wrong people a very clean place to hide. He stood up. Walked to the window. 63 floors of city below him. All of it running. All of it indifferent. He thought about Soren on that church step. About how light he was. About the specific math of a person who had been underfed long enough for it to change their body permanently. About the fact that Soren had known, had stood in this penthouse, had drunk coffee at his kitchen island, had listened to him take business calls, and had said nothing because he was waiting to see what kind of man Selim actually was. Not the kind you read about. The kind you watched under pressure. Behind him, a sound. Soft. Deliberate footsteps. He turned. Soren was at the office doorway. One hand on the frame. Face toward Selim's general direction but reading the room the way he always did, in layers, from information Selim still couldn't fully identify. I'm leaving, Soren said. Selim looked at him. I've already been here too long. Soren continued. Whatever happens with the network, that's yours to deal with. It was always yours. He said it without cruelty. Just fact. Selim took one step toward him. You're still a liability to the people who ran that corridor, Selim said. You identified voices. You held routes. If they find out where you are, they already know where I am. That landed hard. The moment you carried me off those steps, Soren said, you made a visible choice. People like them track visible choices. I've had 3 days. He said it simply. Like he'd already run the math and accepted the answer. I'm not afraid. I've been past afraid. I just don't want to be the reason something comes through your door. Selim crossed the room. Stopped 4 feet from him. You didn't come here to warn me, Selim said. You came here because you've been expecting me to tell you to go. Soren said nothing, which was its own answer. Soren. He waited until Soren's face turned fully toward him. If you walk out, they win. The hallway went absolutely still. Soren stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame and didn't move. and for the first time since the church steps, something in his expression cracked open, just slightly, just enough, before he got it back under control. He didn't leave. 3 things changed after that night. Soren stopped pretending to need as little as possible. Selim stopped pretending he was running this alone. And the work began. Not loudly. Not with confrontations or threats or the kind of visible force that Selim could have deployed and chosen not to. This was a different kind of operation. Slower. More precise. The kind that required 2 people with completely different sets of sight. Soren started in the mornings. He would sit at the kitchen table with a small recorder, Selim's idea, and walk through fragments. Not a testimony. Not a formal account. Just pieces as they came up. Names that attached to voices. Cadences he remembered. The specific rhythm of how certain men spoke when they thought no one was processing them. Selim listened. And he built a map from it. Not on paper. In his head, the way he'd been building maps for 20 years of working in industries where writing things down was the fastest way to lose control of them. On the 4th day, Soren stopped mid-sentence. "Say that again," Selim said. "The man who handled the documentation sign-offs," Soren said. His voice had a specific pattern when he was under pressure. He dropped his consonants on the back half of sentences. And he used a particular phrase every time he was confirming a clearance. He paused. 3 times more. Selim went very still. 3 times more. He had heard that phrase. In his own board meetings. "Describe the voice," he said. Soren described it. Deliberate pace. Low register. Slight southern drift in the vowels on certain words. The habit of inserting a beat of silence before confirming anything, like a man who had learned to make pauses look like confidence. Selim picked up his phone. Pulled up the contact. Darius Kellum. Executive Director of Operational Infrastructure. 12 years inside his company. A man who had been in the room for every major structural decision Selim made in the last decade. The phone sat in his hand. Soren couldn't see the screen. But he heard the silence correctly. "You know him," Soren said. "He's in my inner circle," Selim said. The kitchen went quiet. Then Soren exhaled, not in surprise. In the specific way a person exhaled when something they'd carried for a long time finally had a name and an address. "That matters," Soren said quietly. And Selim understood what that meant. It meant the network hadn't gotten inside his company despite him. It had gotten inside his company because of proximity to him. Because the people who built it understood that the closer you were to untouchable power, the better the cover. They hadn't used Selim. They had warned him. He set the phone down. "We're not going through the system," Selim said. Soren tilted his head. "The system is what protected them," Selim continued. "We go around it. Quietly. And we go all the way down." Soren was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to help build the map." Not a request. A statement. Selim looked at him. This was not the man from the church steps. Not entirely. The fragility that had been on him that morning, real, earned, had not disappeared. It was still there in the way he moved, in the sleep he still lost, in the hands that still tightened at unexpected sound. But underneath it, there was something else. Something that had been quietly waiting for exactly this. "Then we start tonight," Selim said. No one saw it coming. That was the point. The first thing to move was Darius Kellum's operational budget. Not frozen. Not flagged. Just quietly redirected. Internal restructuring, the memo said, routine quarterly reallocation. Kellam's department began running requests through a secondary approval chain. Small delays. Small friction. Nothing alarming. Not yet. 2 weeks in, 2 vendor contracts associated with the defunct shell company expired without renewal. The vendors reached out. Got routed to a compliance review department that was, by design, extraordinarily slow. 3 weeks in, a financial irregularity surfaced in an audit that Selim had specifically requested, framed as a standard internal review. The irregularity pointed at a single account. The account connected to 3 other accounts. 2 of those accounts connected to names. Real names. Men with positions. Titles. Families who did not know what their fathers and husbands were doing between 9 and 5. Selim didn't call law enforcement. Not initially. He called 3 specific attorneys, 1 forensic accountant, and a compliance specialist he had used once before and trusted because she had nothing to gain from loyalty to anyone. Her name was Renata Osei. She was precise, relentless, and had the particular quality of a person who believed that the cleanliness of the process mattered as much as the outcome. She reviewed the files in 48 hours. Called Selim back. "You have enough," she said. "You have more than enough." "I want more than enough," Selim said. "I want airtight." She delivered airtight in 11 days. Meanwhile, Soren was working from the penthouse. Not officially. Not formally. Nothing with his name on it. But every morning he sat with the recorder and pulled out something new, a detail, a date, a piece of auditory memory that Selim would cross-reference against the growing file. He was methodical. He treated his own memory like evidence, which it was. On the first day, a name came up that wasn't Kellam. Above Kellam. Outside Selim's company entirely. A man in an industry adjacent to his. Private security consulting, which meant he existed in the space between legitimate protection services and the kind of arrangements no one put in a press release. His name was Tremont Ash. He had never been in any of the initial files. No direct connection to the shell vendors. No paper trail that came up in the first 3 rounds of review. But Soren remembered a voice from one specific night. A man who had spoken only once, briefly, in a room Soren was not supposed to be conscious enough to hear. Who had said only this: "Make sure the inventory accounting is clean before the end of the fiscal." Inventory accounting. Not goods. Not freight. People. Soren gave the voice description. Selim matched it, not from his company files, but from an industry event recording from 2 years ago that his team was able to pull. Tremont Ash. "There's still one more," Soren said that evening. "The one who started it." Selim looked at him. "Ash isn't the top," Soren said. "He was a coordinator. The man who designed the original structure. I never heard his face. Only one person called him by name, once, in a hallway conversation when they thought the space was empty." He paused. "I've been trying to remember the name for weeks." "And?" Soren turned towards Selim directly. "It came back last night," he said. "He said the name?" Selim recognized it immediately. Because it was a man who was currently scheduled to attend a private gathering, one of the most exclusive closed-door industry events of the year, in 4 days. An event that Selim had already been invited to. The gathering was held on the 48th floor of a building that didn't need to advertise what happened inside it. No press. No photographers. No public guest list. The kind of room where power was not performed but simply assumed. 40 men who controlled enough combined infrastructure, capital, an influence to redirect entire industries without a single public announcement. Selim arrived on time. Soren arrived with him. That alone shifted the air. Not because anyone knew Soren. They didn't. But because Selim Virek did not bring guests to these gatherings. He had attended alone for 11 years. The fact of another person beside him, calm, quiet, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know how to look, registered as information before a word was said. His name was Everett Mace. 61 years old. Third-generation money. On the board of 4 legitimate foundations. His public image was built entirely on philanthropic distance from anything that could be audited. He smiled easily. He moved through rooms like a man who had never once been made to answer for anything. He was standing near the bar when Selim found him. They exchanged the kind of greeting men in these rooms exchanged. Minimal, controlled, the performance of familiarity without warmth. Selim, Mace said. It's been a long time. It has, Selim agreed. He did not look at Soren. Soren stood slightly behind him and to the left, one hand resting on the back of a nearby chair, face forward. Listening. Mace glanced at him briefly. New associate? Consultant, Selim said. Strategic. Mace nodded like that answered anything. The next 40 minutes were patience made physical. Selim moved through the room. Spoke to 3 other men. Had 2 drinks he didn't finish. Waited for the moment when Mace was in a corner with fewer people nearby and the natural acoustics of the room created a pocket of relative quiet. Then he moved. He stopped in front of Mace with the specific stillness of a man who had decided something and was not going to be argued out of it. I want to show you something, Selim said. He laid a folder on the small table beside them. Not thick. Not dramatic. 3 pages. Printed clean. Mace looked at it. What is this? A summary, Selim said. Of a transport network that operated through my company's infrastructure for 14 months. The financial structure. The vendor routing. The documentation chain. He paused. And the names at the top of it. Mace's face did not move. That was telling. A man who didn't recognize what he was being shown would have opened the folder. Would have made a face. Would have asked a clarifying question. Mace looked at the folder and went completely still. I don't know what you think this connects to me, Mace said. Even. Measured. The last page, Selim said. Mace did not look at the last page. There are 3 sets of records, Selim continued. Financial. Operational. And testimonial. The testimonial account is the one that will be difficult to challenge because it was recorded by someone who was inside the network. Not as a participant, but as a witness who was retained against their will and who has an exact auditory memory. He stopped. Detailed enough to identify voice patterns. Specific phrases. Conversations held in private spaces. Mace's jaw tightened. This is a threat, he said. This is a disclosure, Selim said. A threat would have been a phone call. He stepped back slightly. And Soren stepped forward. He was quiet. He was calm. His cloudy eyes pointed at the middle distance. He didn't reach for the folder or touch anything. He just spoke. 14 months and 9 days ago, Soren said. In a holding facility off Route 17, you were on a call that lasted approximately 4 minutes. The person on the other end addressed you by a shortened version of your first name. You told them, and I'm going to say this exactly, the carrier model was my design and I will not have it dismantled because one operational layer got sloppy. Silence. Absolute silence. Mace stared at him. Soren turned his face directly at him. Exact angle. You were standing by a window, Soren said. Because I could hear the traffic frequency shift when you moved toward it. And then you moved back. And you said one more thing before the call ended. He repeated it, word for word. The color left Everett Mace's face in a way that made him look suddenly much older. He looked from Soren to Selim, and back again. And understood, fully, finally, that the folder in front of him was not the problem. The man standing beside Selim Virek was. It ended without spectacle. That was the part no one expected. Not the attorneys. Not Renata Osei, who had seen 100 of these situations resolve and had come to expect at least one moment of drama. Not even Selim, who had planned every step and still, somewhere in the back of his mind, had waited for the thing that didn't come. It just ended. Everett Mace agreed to a private settlement with conditions that functionally erased him from every industry he'd operated in. Not prison. Not yet. But the documentation package Renata had assembled was sitting in the hands of 3 federal contacts, 2 investigative journalists, and a foundation board who had no idea their charitable platform had been used as a laundering surface. If Mace moved sideways even once, all of it moved. He would spend the rest of his life knowing that. Darius Kellum was separated from Selim's company within the week. Quietly. The official statement cited restructuring. Nobody in the company pushed back, not because they didn't notice, but because the people who had known and said nothing understood, without being told, that their window was closing and the smart move was to be cooperative. Tremont Ash's consulting firm lost 3 major contracts in a 30-day period. No public statement attached to any of them. Just terminations. Routine business. The kind that happened all the time and that no one in the press thought twice about. The shell vendors were gone. The corridor was gone. The network that had existed underneath a layer of clean paperwork for more than a year was dismantled so thoroughly that reconstructing it would have required access to evidence that was now secured in 4 different locations and guarded by people who had no financial interest in its survival. Nobody made a speech. Nobody held a press conference. Selim had not wanted spectacle. He'd wanted it to stop. That was different. Soren was in the kitchen the morning after the last piece closed. He had the recorder off. Just coffee. Both hands around the mug. The particular stillness of a person who had been braced for a long time and was only just beginning to understand that the bracing might be over. Selim sat across from him. For a while, neither of them said anything. "My vision is coming back," Soren said. Selim looked at him. The doctor said it was always partial. The deterioration was stress-induced, or accelerated by it. He turned the mug in his hands. She said stabilization was possible if the contributing conditions changed. A beat. Apparently they changed. Selim didn't say anything immediately. He watched Soren's face in the morning light. The cloudy eyes were still there. But there was something different about the way Soren held his head now, a degree less defensive. A fraction more still in the way that was about rest, not vigilance. "You carried the truth the whole time," Selim said. "All of it. Inside you. For over a year." Soren didn't look away. "Someone had to," he said. And that was the thing about it. Soren hadn't survived because someone rescued him. He survived because he refused, completely, quietly, at enormous cost, to let what he knew disappear with him. He had walked onto those church steps on purpose. He had reached toward the one man whose infrastructure had been used against people like him, Not because he trusted him, but because he had calculated that Selim was the only person with enough power to do something about it once he knew. That was not surrender. That was strategy. The most dangerous kind. The kind that looked like weakness until it didn't. Selim restructured 2 operational divisions in the months that followed. Implemented independent oversight that reported outside his direct chain of command. Made it structurally harder, not just philosophically harder, for the people around him to hide things inside his name again. It didn't fix everything. He knew that. Some damage didn't undo. But it moved. And moving was what mattered. Soren eventually took a small apartment 2 floors below the penthouse. Not because Selim asked him to stay. Because he decided to. That distinction mattered to both of them. On the day he moved his things, which wasn't many things, Selim stood in the elevator with him. Not saying much. The numbers counted down. Soren's face was turned slightly toward the doors. "You asked me to carry you for a while," Selim said. Soren said nothing. "But you carried the truth." The elevator stopped. Doors opened. Soren stepped out. Then paused with one hand on the frame, the same way he'd stood in the office doorway weeks ago when he'd almost left for good. "There's something I never told you," he said. Selim looked at him. Soren's face was calm. But his hand on the frame tightened, just slightly. Just enough. And the doors began to close. If this moved you, if it made you feel something, drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment that hit hardest for you? And if you've ever had to carry something heavy in silence the way Soren did, your story matters. Share it. Someone reading your comment tonight needs to know they're not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story on this channel is built to remind you that strength does not always look the way you expect it to. You don't want to miss what's coming next.